Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 24 of the Digestive System. So this is our last section before our next exam. Of course, next exam, Exam 3, will be much like Exam 2, just like Exam 2, same number of questions. Now, this depends upon the format. If you're taking this during COVID-19 quarantine, then it's going to be a written response. If you're taking this during a normal semester, it will be a multiple choice question set, but online through a proctoring service, either our testing center or online proctoring service using HonorLog. This really depends upon what we're doing at that time. So I just want to let you guys know, because I plan on using all these, of course, in the future. So let's get things started with first thing. You want to learn. Sorry, as soon as I start recording, the dogs always go crazy. They hear me talking. They think somebody's here. So you want to learn everything that you possibly can. Chew it, digest it, take it for what it is, and then move on. So I apologize if the dogs are too loud. So starting off now, of course, with my standard multiple choice exam that I give, I always ask one of every one of these questions on every one of the objectives. But that's just me. Again, now on the online with COVID-19, we're not. I'm just going to be making exams that are trying to utilize as much content as possible in 25 questions. So let's get into this and really understand the goal of this system. And what are we supposed to do here is our goal is to obtain nutrients. Hold on, I'm going to. Okay, we're back. So, the thing we were saying is that if you're a living being, you've got to obtain nutrients. Nutrients, anything that can sustain a living being. So these nutrients, what's very interesting is we have the ability to take certain nutrients and use it to produce raw materials. So we saw this in the endocrine system. We talked about that in the endocrine system, you can take the amino acid tyrosine and use that to make things like certain hormones, make your thyroid hormones. Or you could take the tryptophan and produce melatonin. We saw that certain nutrients, for example, like calcium and phosphorus, are utilized in the bone. And we understand that you can produce raw materials for the body that is used to produce the body, produce muscle tissue, produce bone tissue, produce hormones, produce blood cells. We saw that all that throughout the different chapters, that the body is utilizing things from the diet to produce things for the body. And we also can refer to this as anabolism. Remember, anabolism is building up. We make things bigger. Remember, an anabolic reaction we talked about in Chapter 2 in AP 1 is a process where two things that are small are brought together to make something bigger. So we can make essential compounds like hormones. We can make neurotransmitters. We can produce throughout various metabolic pathways something our body needs. Then we can also break them down and use it for energy. Remember in Chapter 3, we talked about a little bit about cellular respiration, and I talked about how the mitochondria will bring in glucose and oxygen and then produce carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. So this is requiring oxygen and organic compounds to make energy in the body. This is called catabolism. Remember, a catabolic reaction breaks things down. So in AP1, something I always say is if I was a DJ, I'd be DJ catabolic, because I'm always breaking it down. Now, catabolic, breaking it down. So we're going to look at how they get these big things. Basically, imagine if you're eating a big, thick, juicy cheeseburger and you eat this thing. Well, that big, thick, juicy cheeseburger is too big to fit into a cell. But we can break it down by first taking a bite out of that cheeseburger, then chewing that bite up, grinding it into smaller pieces, mixing it with saliva, mixing it with stomach acids, mixing it with digestive enzymes. And by the time it's done, it's broken down into its base molecules. Okay. We can get it down to its base molecules to absorb those molecules and utilize them, okay? And then what's left is waste, and we remove that. So we'll absorb what we don't want's the waste, and then we remove it. So we're going to look at how this happens. And to really get ourselves started, we're going to understand what our digestive system is. Now, our digestive system is kind of two components here. We're going to see the first component is just the food tube. The tube that goes from the mouth to the anus that acts as basically a conduit to move the food through and absorb the nutrients. It's a very muscular tube called the alimentary canal or the digestive tract. It starts at the mouth, ends at the anus. But it goes from the mouth, it goes to your pharynx, to your esophagus, your stomach, large and small intestines, ends at the anus. Now, I usually want to have these underlined in my notes, and I usually try to make sure that's always done. It's just that there's always things like that happen where I'll be in the middle of editing and just doesn't happen when I'm writing. So now all this food tube, then we enter what's called our accessory organs, and they are attached to it. They secrete into the digestive tract to help break down food. Things like your salivary glands, your liver, your pancreas, and gallbladder. They produce secretions into these. Now, there are other accessory organs like teeth and the tongue and a variety of things that we're going to talk about, okay? But these aren't all of them, but I do want to kind of give you just an idea. These are things that are associated to the digestive tract that aid in the breakdown of food, okay? So if we look at that, you could see teeth, tongue, salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. These are all accessory organs that help in the digestive process, where our oral cavity to our pharynx, to our esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, out the anus, that's where we're moving through with the digestive tract or the alimentary canal. Now, what do we basically say? What is the 4 things, or rather 6 things, our digestive tract does for us, our digestive system? Now, there are a variety of functions we have. First off, we're going to ingest. We're going to get the food into this mouth, okay? Food enters the digestive tract, and it does this using the mouth. The mouth is where we get the food in, okay? We're going to put the food in the mouth. Then we mechanically process that. Mechanical processing is chewing. We chew it up, and then we make that food small enough to swallow it. So basically what we do is, as humans, we would imagine that we can't generally fit a whole big old thick hamburger in our mouth, so we take a bite off of that, a smaller piece, then we chew that small piece up. And now that piece is small enough to fit into the digestive tract. Then we start using enzymes and things to break it down so we can absorb it. Now, absorption of things occurs in very different things like glucose. Glucose, once your enzymes cleave the glucoses, you can absorb glucose. We know that we already have glucose transport proteins. Lots of places have them. Basically, beta cells of the pancreas, liver, intestines, and kidneys, they all can just go and absorb glucose as it is. You don't have to modify glucose. You don't have to do anything to it. But things like proteins, polysaccharides, or triglycerides, we have to modify them. We have to break them down. We have to take the biochemistry, do the hydrolysis, break it down. We have to cleave off pieces. We have to break the bonds that hold them together using hydrolytic enzymes. Now, secretion, we can secrete things into the tract. It is very common that we release acids. For example, stomach acids are produced from the lining of the stomach into the digestive tract, into the lumen of the stomach. There are enzymes that are also going to be produced not only by the stomach, but by the pancreas, by the intestinal wall. There'll be buffers produced by a lot of these organs, mucus, water, things like that. And they are going to aid in the digestion, but we have to secrete things. Now, digestion, and I kind of wanted to, probably I'm going to take this digestion, glucose absorption, and move it down here with absorption. I guess it doesn't really matter as much as where I put it, but I think I'm going to put it down there for later classes. But absorption, we move the food along the gut and we can transport things across cell membranes of the digestive tract. Now remember, the things that cross cell membranes are usually going to be very small and nonpolar substances are going to cross cell membranes very easily. If you're large and polar, you're not going to cross easily without going through a protein. So we have proteins, we have simple diffusion, so we use facilitated diffusion, simple diffusion, active transport processes to move things across cell membranes. Think back to chapter 3 and how we saw things cross, and that's what's going on with absorption. Now, defecation is the end. Whatever's left, we have waste. This is what's left. This is what I didn't absorb. Now, could you imagine that depending upon the hormones present that your body's producing, that may adjust what you absorb, and that's going to adjust what you defecate. If your body is decreasing absorption of calcium, then you're going to have more calcium in your fecal matter. So your body's not absorbing as much. So we eliminate waste as feces, and we remove that from the body. We defecate. Now, we also use our body's tissues, the tissues of the digestive system, to protect the tissues that surround it from acids and enzymes. Acids, remember, acids have a high amount of hydrogen ions, and we should know by now that hydrogen ions are very harmful to the tissues. And so we want to protect against that. Enzymes, remember we talked about that they could cleave covalent bonds, and that we, of course, are made up of a lot of covalent bonds because they're always strong bonds, and we don't want to break those. So what we're going to see is you're going to protect the tissues from the acids and enzymes. We also have mechanical stress going on. As food moves through, it can become abrasive. Certain things could be in that food. There is churning, there is stretching and distension and things like that. So mechanical stresses could actually harm, tear, or rip the digestive tract, or become to be damaging it. So we have multiple layers. Remember, a lot of this, we have stratified squamous, or we have stratified columnar, or simple columnar epithelium throughout places, and mucus. Then we also know that there could be bacteria in our food, for example. If you guys have microbiology, you know that there's a lot of food-spoiling bacteria like E. coli, things like that. Clostridium species, things like that, okay? So we don't want that happening. So we want to protect against those things, so our digestive juices. Now, as we get started, what we want to kind of do is, as we go in, we want to first understand that your abdominopelvic cavity is where the digestive organs are. And they're mostly going to be in the peritoneal cavity, which has the peritoneum. Now, the peritoneum, remember, is a double-lined cell membrane. Now, we have talked several times about this in the course of my lectures. I know I've taught it on multiple occasions, which is always a good thing. And I always like to repeat myself. I don't like to just say, oh, you've seen it, I'm not covering it again. You guys know me. I'm the kind of person who likes to just hit it and keep repeating it so we fully understand it. So let's say I have an organ right here, and I'm just going to use a heart in this case, just as any visceral organ. And then I'm going to draw a circle around this, and this is going to reference the body wall. And we're just going to use the heart as a stand-in for an organ. And remember that these organs, many of these organs have double-lined, sealed membranes, where there is always one layer that is attached or very close to the organ, and then another layer that is either attached or very close to the body wall. And if you are attached or close to the body wall, you are a parietal layer. Pa, 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 ra, tol, parietal. Gotta sing it like Bad Romance, okay? And then we always had the one on the organ called the visceral layer. Okay, we always had these two layers of all serous membranes. Remember, all serous membranes have a parietal and a visceral layer. Now, in this case, this is peritoneum, so we're in the peritoneal cavity. There is a visceral peritoneum and a parietal peritoneum that you will see associated in the digestive tract. So the abdominopelvic cavity, which has this peritoneum, has a parietal layer that actually lines the inside of the parietal cavity. So it's actually fused to the inside of the abdomen. Then the visceral peritoneum covers the organs. And then also there's one that prevents an entanglement, because as digestion happens, this muscle twists and knots and can become entangled, which can cause an obstruction. And obstructions can become fatal. Not only can they become fatal, but they can get in, they can become infected, they can entangle and become obstructed. You won't be able to get nutrients and you would die. So there's a lot of things. We hold them in place and prevent entanglement with the mesentery. The mesenteries are important to do this. Now, as you can see, mesenteries, they prevent the entanglements. You would see that your parietal peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum, visceral covers the organ, parietal covers the inner lining of the abdominal cavity. Now, I oftentimes like to discuss that we have a very smart gut. You probably heard people say that you could trust your gut. I've got a gut feeling. Do you trust your gut? You can. Why? You have a very smart gut. Why is your gut so smart? Well, it's got 2 Masters of Science degrees. So it's a very smart gut. It went and got 2 Masters of Science. Now, the Masters of Science it has, MS. Here's one MS. Here's another MS. There are 2 MS degrees. So the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, serosa, MS. It went and got 2 Masters of Science. So what we're actually going to do is, when I sketch this, I'm going to actually begin myself here with serosa and kind of build it up. And we're going to begin with a serosa layer. Now, the serosa, this is basically visceral peritoneum. Okay, this is basically your visceral peritoneum. So, MS. Serosa. Now, we're going to have our muscularis externa, submucosa, mucosa. So now with red, I'm going to draw muscularis externa. And we're going to write in here smooth muscle and muscularis externa. And then I'm going to use a blue color here, and I'm going to reference the connective tissue layer of submucosa. And then I'm just going to use purple here, and I'm going to reference, and I always like to make my mucosa. And this is the epithelial layer. And what's going to happen is this is where the food will be in contact, okay? So you're going to have food in contact. This is the lumen. Now, these walls of this, why does it matter that we know this? Well, there are certain inflammatory bowel diseases you may learn about in pathophysiology, some other courses, and like a lot of what goes on in the submucosa. That's where a lot of your things like the lymph mast cells and things like that will be, the cells that will degranulate, and they will cause the inflammatory diseases. Molecules that come from the food, for example. Let's say you guys have a gluten intolerance, and there are people who do have celiac disease, have gluten intolerance, and the proteins, storage protein gluten comes in, and it acts as an antigen, and your body forms the IgEs, which degranulates your mast cells, which causes inflammation and things like that, causes the spasms of the gut, causes you to end up having diarrhea and things like that, upset stomach. Now, also, like smooth muscle layer, when it weakens, you'll get bulges outwards of little pockets that bulge outwards that cause a little pocket where material can get in called a diverticula. And when the diverticula that form due to weakened smooth muscle layer, you'll get a condition called diverticulitis when that becomes inflamed. So very important that we understand some of these things. Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, serosa. Now remember, the mucosa, that is the mucous membrane, so it is an epithelial cell layer with mucus. Submucosa is your connective tissues. It's dense, irregular connective tissue. And Mr. Leffert did forget to go in and put connective tissues in his in his drawing there. So let's add that. Okay. So, and remember that there will be blood vessels and nerves found inside that. Muscularis externa, smooth muscle, and the serosa is visceral peritoneum. So these are the four layers, of the digestive tract. Most of it. There are some exceptions to this, okay? Now, there are 2 layers for most of the gut, has 2 layers of muscularis externa. There will be an exception in the stomach that has 3. Now, the mucosa. Let's look at mucosa. Let's take our drawing and go in order with mucosa. The mucosa is a mucous membrane. That means we always have an epithelium covered in mucus. Remember, mucus is produced by cells referred to as a goblet cell, mucus secreting cell. Now, you can have there's an epithelium, then there's going to be the underlying lamina propria, things like that. Now, the epithelium is referred to, guys, as either being a stratified epithelium or a simple epithelium, so it could be stratified squamous or simple columnar. Pretty much your oral cavity, mouth, and esophagus is stratified squamous. The stomach is simple columnar, stomach, small and large intestine, simple columnar. Now, inside here, scattered around, you're going to have a cell called an enteroendocrine cell. Entero, what does that tell me? Enteric. This means it's in the gut. Endocrine means it secretes hormones. So this is cells in the gut that secrete hormones. They control the digestive processes. They control the movement of food, activities, gland secretions, things that we need to do in the gut. Okay. And you guys will be learning about diseases as you go through dealing with your programs and other issues dealing with some of these cells not being able to secrete or being damaged to certain diseases. So you guys do need to know them. Everybody's like, I don't understand why I got to know that. I just need basic knowledge. But they're not going to teach you those things there. They're going to expect you to know them when you walk in. I'm having my coffee still. Okay. So what we're going to see is the lamina propria is the other part, and I kind of needed to do this. Is what I wanted to do is talk about the digestive epithelium and the lamina propria. And everybody's like, but if I don't do it now, it just won't happen. So I'm going to do it now. Okay. Now, the lamina propria is the underlying component where the blood vessels, lymphatic tissues, glandular tissues, things like that are there. Now, the other thing that happens here is there are folds, and there will be many folds that are located here. Now, there is a very important thing to know about these folds. Why there are folds is that they increase surface area, okay? Now, our goal here is to really just kind of go back and think about this a little bit. If you've had me before, you've already seen this sketch. But let's say we have a point A and a point B. And that point A is our starting location. Point B is where we're going on vacation. Now, when we're going on vacation, there's two kinds of fathers out there when we drive to vacation. Now, we're going to assume that point A and point B on both of these are identically the same distance and all that good stuff. It's all the same point. Now, if we were going on vacation, we got into a vehicle and drove, first father on vacation is mine. My father is like, okay, we're on the road. We're making good time. We're not going to stop. If you've got to pee, there's a jug in the back. Go in that. We're not stopping. I've got two 40-gallon tanks, and we're not stopping. And so that's what he would do. We're making good time. Then the other kind of father on vacation, that would be Clark Griswold, wouldn't it? Holiday Road. And so what happened with Clark Griswold? You know, he went everywhere, had to go see the world's largest ball string, had to drag his dog behind the car, and had to drive around with Anna on the roof and everything like that. All right, it was just misadventures with Clark Griswold and his family and Rusty and everybody in the car. Now, so here we have all this area covered. And what each of these things would be is things like villi, microvilli, and plicae. Okay? All of this is things that increase the surface area. Now, if this was a cell membrane, all of this, we span the same distance, but we have more surface area to absorb material through. Okay, so we want to increase that surface area that is available to do absorption using things like villi, microvilli, plica circularis. The circular folds are temporary because when you feel it, they stretch, called plica circularis. Now, the submucosa, remember, dense irregular connective tissue. It actually binds mucosa to the muscle. There are lymphatic vessels and blood vessels. There's exocrine glands that secrete. Remember, exocrine into a duct secretes things like buffers to neutralize any acid in the digestive tract, the lumen. And then it also has a submucosal neural plexus of neurons, which are sensory, parasympathetic, and sympathetic ganglionic neurons. These are the postganglionic neurons, those that are inside. So we would typically call this an intramural ganglia. One might call this an intramural ganglia. Not something I spent much time on in the autonomic nervous system. I was more concerned about things like your uh, alphas and betas and things like that. Things that you absolutely, the receptors and the neurotransmitters that you've got to know for your programs. So as we see this, this controls the digestive tract. Okay, remember we had the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic is the sympathetic boss of the digestive tract. It's like, hey, digestive tract, relax, take it easy. Don't need to work hard. It's okay. You've earned it. Have you had your break today? Have you taken off? Go ahead and take the rest of the day off. Very sympathetic. He's like, relax. Parasympathetic is like, don't relax. Work hard. Work hard. Work hard. Don't stop. Okay? He's not very sympathetic. He's parasympathetic. He's like your parents. Like, get to work. So, now, Muscularis externa, this is your smooth muscle. So remember, involuntary, non-striated. This is tissues that do not need to be told to work. They work under the control of the autonomic nervous system. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, and adipose, remember, are all controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, there are two layers in most of the gut, an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal. So one of the ways ICOL, ICOL, inner circular, outer longitudinal, ICOL, inner circular, outer longitudinal. Now, the muscularis externa, remember, now your enteric nervous system is kind of like the middle management here. It is going to receive commands from parasympathetic and sympathetic. Now, sympathetic, remember, is the sympathetic boss of the gut. He's like, oh, you work so hard, take off. Here, have an extra day of vacation. You work so hard, you need to take off. Relax. Oh, take a break. Parasympathetic is sometimes like a lot of our parents. Parents like, get to work, go work, go mow the yard, go take the trash down, go do this, go do that. Every 5 minutes it felt like. And so get to work. Your parents, and maybe not modern day parents, but at least I know mine were like that all the time. Like, shouldn't you be working? Shouldn't you be doing something? So the parasympathetic nervous system increases the muscle activity. So it wants to tell the muscles, get to work. Sympathetic's like, take it easy, relax, I'm sympathetic. Okay? Now, the digestive tract, when it moves, when the smooth muscle, longitudinal, circular muscle layers move, they produce a movement, a wave of motions across the digestive tract around its length that moves food, called a bolus, through it, called peristalsis. Peristalsis is these waves of contractions. Now, what happens is, your circular muscles kind of pinch off and contract. And they say, hey, food, you can't go this way. Then the longitudinal muscles, they'll contract ahead of the bolus, and they'll rhythmically move the food through. And it helps move it through, and it kind of helps this rhythmic. That's how, every time I teach it in class, I always make that noise. I don't know why, but I always do. So I have to give you guys that little bit of feeling of being there in front of me, because I always got to put on a show when I'm in front of students. Now, segmentation is another type of movement. This is specific to the stomach. Segmentation, making me think of it when I was at home. I can remember when I was a kid home in the summertime, and if it was raining, then I'd be kind of stuck in the house. And we didn't have cable growing up. They didn't get cable at Possum Trot. Possum Trot Ridge did not have cable. Grew up very poor. And the place where I grew up, you just could not, we didn't get cable. The cable existed. I mean, I was born in the early 80s, and I grew up mostly in the 90s, but cable existed, okay? We couldn't get it where I lived. And so if it was raining, I was stuck inside, and I always would get stuck inside, and I hated it because when my mother was home, she would always be watching her soap operas, and one of them I always called as the stomach churns, as the world turns. So I always had to watch that. Oh gosh, I hate it because there was only the one TV that had anything on it. We didn't have a TV in every room. Friends of mine, I knew people who didn't live in Possum Trot Ridge, but we always used to joke that we called it Possum Trot Ridge because we were so poor the possums didn't walk through there, they trotted because we were afraid we'd shoot them and eat them. Um, so anyway, the segmentation is just the stomach churns. The stomach churns like a dishwasher, okay? This is actually unique to the stomach we'll talk about. And it mixes it with secretions. It's a type of mechanical digestion, something the stomach does. Now, what is it that regulates these movement mechanisms to regulate digestive tract movement and regulate gland secretions? Well, there are two major factors, neural and hormonal. We already know that there are two major control systems of the gut. We already know the endocrine system and the nervous system control the body. We already know those are two major control systems for the body. Well, so we use neural and hormonal mechanisms. Now, these can be local, which are usually hormones, or neural, so the local things are things like prostaglandins and histamine. And we know, like, when chemicals that can be coming in the body can actually change and alter these. Now, like prostaglandins, when you're pain and inflammation, can stimulate. So, like, let's say that something comes into the gut that we don't normally want to eat. Things like prostaglandins and histamines can be released. There's a lot of us out there. Now, me, I love spicy foods. Now, I usually go out to places and get wings and get the hottest sauces they have. Now that I'm in my late 30s, I don't do that so much now, but like when I was in my 20s, me and my buddies, we'd go out, we'd order the hottest wings you could get, and then we would order, we'd go out and get a few beers and eat some hot wings and see who could go the longest without drinking beer to settle our hot wings. And, of course, the ones of us who did not, the last one to drink didn't have to pay. So we'd see who'd go the longest without eating. We'd eat the hottest sauces they had at a place, and then who could go the longest without drinking beer to get rid of the pain. So fun times. Now, of course, it does bother me a little bit more, but you guys may notice you might get an upset stomach if you go eat certain hot foods. Now, typically, my wife and I, we love to go eat Indian food, and I'll get it Indian spicy. And sometimes you get a little upset stomach after, but I can handle the heat in my mouth. It's usually just the after effects sometimes. It may make you a little bit more upset as you get older. But those chemicals, these things usually actually stimulate the release of things like prostaglandins and histamines that will adjust and affect the cells in that area, can make you a little bit upset. And it can coordinate responses. For example, if the local pH changes in one section of the gut, or a chemical or physical stimulus, but it only affects one portion, the area where that is, until that chemical maybe is gone. And this is why people get things like alcohol does this. This is why you might get the beer poops. This is why you may get diarrhea from consuming too much alcohol or very spicy foods. Now, some people are less sensitive to spicy foods than others. And I still really enjoy the spicy foods. It's just now that I'm in my late 30s, 37, so it actually may affect. I thought I was 38. I don't turn 38 till July 29th, and I thought I was 38. I had to ask my wife how old I was. I don't keep up with things like that very well. We didn't celebrate birthdays growing up. So I really don't ever know. So so your neural mechanisms, these guys here, they control movement along your digestive tract. Neural mechanisms can control the movements and secretions. Motor neurons, for example, control how muscles contract and how glands secrete. So it's motor neurons doing that. I kind of like, I can blend that together and pretty much make this to say motor neurons control. I can always rewrite that a little bit, make it a little bit clearer, neater, and nicer. But it's in places called the myenteric plexus. We call that. Those are the neurons that control those things. Now, neural mechanisms can have short and long reflexes. Now, remember, a short and long reflex, these are types of visceral reflexes. A short reflex, remember, does not include the CNS. So it only does small parts. It's local reflexes for one area, one small area, like let's say to control the opening of the ileocecal valve, something like that. There is no CNS control, sensory neuron, motor neuron, interneuron, all that, but there is no CNS. It has no CNS component. And this is why I don't think this needs to be there, because if you really look at it with a neural mechanism, your interneurons are located in the CNS, so there should not be actually an interneuron there. So I apologize. Interneurons are CNS neurons. So long reflexes have a CNS component. They usually involve glossopharyngeal, vagus, and pelvic nerves controlling large-scale movement across the entire tract. So much higher level control, for example, peristalsis, things like that. Now, as you can see, both neural and hormonal mechanisms control the digestive tract itself. Local mechanisms, long-term long reflexes, short reflexes, and other hormonal actions control the release and movement of the gut, digestive processes, things like that. So what we're going to do is, okay, so give me 1 second. Okay, I was just checking the schedule that I usually do, and I usually do stop here. The next part of it, a lot of this you will see in lab, so I will kind of speed through that a little bit because we already had lab before this. Or by this part, after this, you guys would have probably already watched your lab recording. So I'm going to go ahead and quit here, and then we'll pick up next one on this. We'll pick up with the oral cavity. So guys, thank you so much. And this concludes the lecture.